Welcome to CEO Corner. My name is Sarah McGrath, Director of 360 Search Recruitment Services across Ireland and the UK. Today we're interviewing Dr Dylan Colbert, Performance Psychologist. Upon completion of Dylan's PhD from Maynooth University, Dylan embarked on a performance psychology career, writing papers in the areas of intelligence, behaviour analysis, academic performance, stress, and social support. Most notably, Dylan's work demonstrating that intellectual performance can be improved via intervention has challenged the notion that intelligence cannot be trained. Interest in this research has sparked speaking engagements across Ireland and Europe, and we are thrilled that Dylan is joining us on CEO Corner. Dylan, welcome to CEO Corner.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So I'd like to start with understanding a little bit about you and how you entered into the world of performance psychology. And I know that you've studied genius and intelligence and memory. So talk me through some of that.
Well, I suppose my interest in psychology started quite young. And I think now that I look back, I can see the seeds for this interest in high performance performance psychology started off quite early, because even from the time I was like 8, 9, 10, I was obsessed with personalities. I was obsessed with icons and high performers, and I wanted to try to understand what made them tick, what made them different, what made them special. And it wasn't maybe until I got into my teenage years that I became fascinated by this one little thing. I've said it before. I found it fascinating looking at how we could put a man on the moon, but yet we didn't understand what went on between his ears. That juxtaposition was so strange to me, that we would have such advances in one area and we're kind of a little bit further behind. So for me, psychology was the frontier of scientific knowledge, of scientific investigation, and that excited me because I was curious, and I sought knowledge that way. So I started psychology in Maynooth, and it probably was when I started to take classes with who would then go on to be my PhD and master supervisor, Brian Roach. He would deliver classes on behavior analysis, behaviorism. And the thing that really spoke to me about that was the fact that it allowed us, it gave us a methodology, it gave us a skill set to have impact, which is what I wanted. When I was looking at a prospective career in psychology, I was worried about an ivory tower situation if I went down research, but I wanted to have impact. I wanted to test this knowledge. So I started my PhD, my master's, my PhD with him, looking at intelligence. It was a big challenge because we essentially contested a centuries-old notion that intelligence could not be improved, and a traditionally held belief that intelligence could not be improved. But through the application of behavior analytic principles, we've produced a good bit of research showing that that might not be the case, that we've produced some real improvements in intellectual performance. I was interested in intelligence because it is one of the greatest advantages you can have. And again, kind of decoding that interest, I realized I wasn't necessarily trying to make people more intelligent. I was trying to give people the tools to help them perform at a higher level. And intelligence was just an obvious direction to go with that. So once I completed my PhD, lectured for a few years, continued working in intelligence, I realized that there's a wider skill set that we can attack and that we can improve, and that we can kind of foster real applications for and impact for individuals. And that's how I shifted into the broader sphere of performance psychology.
Wow. I love it. God, it is like, for me, it's just so fascinating. Like I guess it's one of the reasons as well why CEO Corner was created, is to share stories of why people are successful, you know, and I think somebody that's just starting out in their career, they might not have access to the story of the CEO of a multinational or somebody that we deem really successful. And I even wrote my psychology thesis on trying to even answer that question. You know, it's difficult to sort of pinpoint. I guess, in your opinion, do you see a recipe for success, or can success be subjective?
Well, yes to both. So if we look at success first and foremost, because obviously we have to figure out what we're aiming for if we want to like unlock the recipe for it. Success is clearly objectively measured. And there are clear metrics that people would not debate. If you're in a business context, that could be profit, it could be productivity, efficiency, impact, achievement, whatever. And for an individual, that can be a kaleidoscope of different things. And what I would tend to say is objective success is important, but it's probably more important to your boss. Subjective success is where it's really at. So as you know, I'm training for a marathon at the minute. Objective success in a marathon is winning it, is doing it under a particular time period. But we know people don't do it for that reason. They do it to get across the finish line. They do it to test themselves, to challenge themselves. So I tend to find it's that subjective marker of success that's really going to activate, energize, motivate an individual towards giving it their all. In terms of a recipe, you can never guarantee success. But what I would say is, throughout my years of research in this area, I have been able to highlight a collection of psychological, motivational, emotional, behavioral skills or capabilities that set you up for success. That while I can't really say that having these will guarantee that you'll be successful, I can pretty much say if you don't have these, you're probably not going to be as successful as you would like. So I tend to look at those sorts of things, and I tend to try to see, okay, how much of these do you have? What are you missing? Is there a little flaw in the armor? I use what I call a psychological scout report to have a look at where can I help you out? Where are you kind of falling down? What's the barrier here? And then I try to facilitate your improvement of that.
So what are those headings? Motivation?
Yeah, well, generally what I tend to say would be motivation, mindset, action, and emotion. Just to give you the big headings for those. So motivation, people are motivated in very different ways. People engage in activities for very different reasons. Some people engage in their job, let's say, because it's intrinsically rewarding. They love it for the craft itself. The day in, day out, the nuts and bolts of their job is fulfilling for them. But not everybody is like that. Some people will be extrinsically rewarded. They want status, they want acclaim, they want money, whatever it is. And there's a few different shades of grey in between those sorts of things. One of the first things I always do with any client or any team is try to get to the bottom of that. What's going to get somebody excited? What makes somebody really passionate about engaging in the activity? Because if you want to be successful, it's going to necessitate an incredible amount of work and quite likely an awful lot of sacrifice. So if you don't have that motivation, that passionate, fiery motivation kind of day in, day out or close to, it's going to be more difficult to stay committed and engaged. So motivation is the first thing. Why are you doing it? What are you looking for? People are very different in that way, and I have to speak to them differently on that basis. I have to structure goals differently on that basis. I have to set challenges for them on that basis. Mindset, we could talk for days and days about mindset. It could be beliefs. It could be aspects of personality. It could be cognitive styles, problem-solving styles, decision-making styles, goal orientations. If we're then looking at action, a lot of the time what I focus in on is commitment and discipline. Because one thing humans are very good at is setting big goals. They can have very clearly defined long-term goals. But one thing that pretty much all of us struggle with is making sure that the day-to-day short-term engagement is there, even though the gratification of the long-term goal is far and away. It could be 6 months, it could be 10 years down the line. So staying motivated in that context is difficult because you're not getting that reward, you're not getting that boost. So we have to stay disciplined. I look at micro goals. I look at various strategies to build accountability. I look at various ways to make things more enjoyable so people can connect with their motivation. And then the last one I look at is emotion. And you could tick all those other boxes. Everything else could be in place. You could know why you're doing it. You can have the resources to do it pretty much. You can be doing the day in, day out. But I find emotion is often that little thing that throws people off. That it could be a matter of resilience. It could be a matter of dealing with failure. It could be a matter of feeling, isolated or disenchanted and trying to deal with that. It could be performance anxiety. It could be anything at all. And that often seems to be a spanner in the works. And even really competent people, really high achievers can have difficulty with just marshalling and harnessing and controlling their emotions.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen people absolutely crumble when they fail in business, and it takes time to rebuild and come back from 100%. that, and they can stay a little bit scarred and a little bit fearful as a result. In the work that you do, you work with athletes, and I understand that marginal gains such as even 1% can be so significant that it could mean a win. My understanding would be that athletes typically would tend to be quite disciplined and focused and are striving for that. So can you see the principles of sports psychology successfully be applied in business? And is there a model that we can follow in business to improve and to get more for ourselves?
Well, 100%. And even just first off, to look at that, I think you spoke there to, I don't know whether it's a misconception, but it might be a slight exaggeration that a lot of people have, that they look at high achieving athletes and they think they're just on it and locked in every single day. And the very best maybe are, or very close to, they're locked in 99 days out of 100. But the thing that I often experience with working with athletes is they speak about motivation and commitment waning, that they question, just like in business that you're talking about there, they get a knock, they lose a fight, they lose a match, they have a poor level of performance, and they question whether they're up to it, they question whether they want to do it still. And some days they get up out of bed and they don't want to go for the run or they don't want to go training. So that's one of the reasons why motivation is important, but discipline beats motivation every day of the week. Okay. Because as I say to all of my clients, you don't have to want to do it. You know, it doesn't have to be rewarding for you to do it. You have to keep an eye on the prize. You have to understand the value that this 7 a.m. run is going to have for you, even though it's lashing rain. And you have to trust in that. So that's one thing. So, you know, people turn up to their job in the morning and might not want to do it. Athletes show up to them, might not want to do it. In terms of a model and how I suppose sport is similar, or we can draw parallels between sport and business, if you actually go beneath the surface level, you're going to see that there's an awful lot of similarities. That just like in sport, business has a goal, has an objective, whatever that is, to achieve growth, to achieve a certain standard of revenue, to have an impact, to launch X, Y, Z, whatever it is. You have a goal in mind, you have to draw upon domain general skills. So that could be personality, it could be intelligence. In sport, that could be raw athleticism, raw power. You have domain-specific skills that you have to train up. So that could be marketing, negotiation, whatever it is, mediation. In sport, that's passing a football, you know. And then as well as that, to go back to what I mentioned, that idea of motivation, mindset, action, and emotion, it's the same ingredients. That's the thing that I found, and that's what I'm really interested by, that if you take apart the puzzle of the Roger Federer or the Michael Jordan, you're going to find the same pieces that you'll find with a high-performance CEO. They're just applied in a different context. So in the same way, if we can empower an individual to have these ingredients, to build them up, to remove those same barriers that would work in a sporting context, it'll work in a business context. It works in a scientific context. It'll work in a political context. It doesn't matter. These are the ingredients for being great, regardless of what you want to be great at.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. Mediocrity can be a challenge in work settings. You know, sometimes like I spot that internal monologue myself, you know, where I'm giving myself a free pass some days, and maybe that's okay. And I you know, I've seen mediocrity trickle down as well into performance, you know, in teams, but some people maybe innately are not ambitious, or they don't know what direction, or, you know, they're happy with the output that they give. How do we as businesses create an environment where people actually want more than, you know, the mediocre, the average, even for those that are not innately or, you know, driven by ambition?
Well, there's a lot of different angles you can go at it. One good place to start, at least, is, again, if you're going to try to improve performance, you have to have a very clear idea of what performance looks like and what you're trying to achieve. So like a really good trick for doing that, or a really good technique for doing that, is make sure you kind of hone in on the mission statement. Make sure you hone in on exactly what the company is trying to achieve. A lot of companies might construct this, and it might be a little bit abstract, and it might be a little bit airy-fairy. We want to make sure it's grounded. And beyond that, we want it to be well-defined so that everybody who works for that organization understand, what is this team trying to do? And the value of that is that it allows you to develop a very precise focus, allows you to have tunnel vision almost, and looking at, okay, how do we ensure we're doing the things that bring us closer to hitting that mark, rather than trying to hit 10 different poorly defined marks. So try to make sure that every employee, every team member knows that mission statement, you know, without being patronizing and condescending, because we've all been through that. But they know what direction we're pulling in. And then beyond that, not to repeat myself, understand the motivation, because when you look at, say, leadership or management or creating a culture, what you're trying to do is optimize individual efforts towards a collective objective. You're trying to get the individual employee working for the organizational target. So what you really need to do is, I think there's a lot of emphasis being placed on I suppose making sure that the employee works in a way that the organization wants them to, rather than trying to align goals. There's a lot of research showing that goal alignment, which is essentially demonstrating that the individual will be able to reach their own individual personal goals if they're working towards that group goal.
Okay.
And it's important that you structure that workplace environment in that direction. So you could have an employee that's interested in upskilling. Well, okay, we will give you the opportunity to upskill, but we want you to apply that in the context of achieving this group goal. So there's this, I was going to say synergy there. That's really awkward corporate talk. Synergy between the two. So that's one. You want to understand what makes them tick.
Yeah.
Some people want more free time. Some people want more money. Some people want more acclaim. Whatever it is, try to understand that and try to sequence and organize their efforts, their day-to-day, towards that individual goal in a way that targets your group goal. As well as that, there's certain things that you can do, I suppose, to facilitate growth in the individual. Because as you said, some people are high achievers, they're ambitious, they're driven. You're going to lean on them, because if you fulfill those first two steps, what you're going to see is those driven, ambitious workers are going to take off. So it's important then at that point that you highlight good work, that you showcase to the entire group that their work is valuable, it's impactful, it's considered, it's acknowledged, it's appreciated, it's worthwhile, all those sorts of things. We've all been in jobs where we feel like we're just banging our head against a brick wall. We don't want that. You disengage. So you have that. You can set up a reward system. Obviously, there's plenty of work on that. Corporates understand that in terms of how to leverage efforts in a particular direction towards a particular goal. That's a good one. And then there's an awful lot of research that says, and sometimes you see, the upper echelons of a corporate hierarchy aren't really interested in this, right? Because it's a bit risky by its nature. What you really need to do is empower the individuals to have the freedom to innovate and to take risks. Because if they are given that freedom, what you'll see is they take more ownership of their own work. And if they feel ownership, they feel accountable. So they'll give it everything they have. So you give them that opportunity as well. And then finally, once you're, I suppose, facilitating growth, if you can identify skill deficits, that's the type of work that I tend to do. I go into a team and say, you need a bit of this, you need less of that. We can do that. And then once that's kind of set up for success, you want to maintain standards, obviously. And the best way to do that is make sure that you establish a sense of trust and open communication, that you embrace conflict for the advantage it can have. So a good way of viewing it is, I always say, it's absolutely okay to attack ideas, not attack people.
Okay.
And make sure people understand that and people feel open to throw out a bad idea. And once you kind of do that and you provide precise, constructive, well-meaning feedback, that's 4 steps that'll go a long way to raising standards, is what I would say.
That's like a crash course. Wow. So I think understanding your employee, understanding what they want, what they're driven by, and then looking at the scope of their role to create some flexibility and autonomy within the scope. So, okay. So we can take that, we can implement that. I work in the industry that I work in, financial services. There's a huge amount of mergers and acquisitions happening at the moment, and like it's transforming the space that I trade in. And with that, we're seeing intellectual capacity leave the industry in the form of retirements. And some people are at retirement age, some people are not. Some people are 10 years off. And I guess I listened to a podcast recently, and one of the things that the scientist was talking about is that once the mind retires, the body follows. And I thought that was it stuck with me, that statement. I guess I was interested in your view on that. And I'm guessing maybe we have cognitive dips in our lives, naturally. I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, well, 100%. You often hear these stories of somebody working hard for 50 years and then, they're buried a year after they retire, horrible stories. In terms of that, we do see natural changes in cognitive ability and intelligence, in social intelligence, emotional intelligence too. To use a kind of a very traditionally accepted model of intelligence, there is a distinction made typically between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. When we look at fluid intelligence, you can view it as kind of raw intellectual power, learning ability, the ability to adapt to novel circumstances, the ability to retain, encode, and retrieve memories. We have that, and then on the other hand, we have crystallized intelligence, which is really the outcome of applying fluid intelligence, your learning capacity, to learning experiences. So crystallized intelligence is more like knowledge. It's acquired information, it's skill, it's experience. And when we look at these two different types of intelligence, they're closely related, but they have different developmental trajectories. So what you tend to see, and a lot of people won't like hearing this next part, what you tend to see with fluid intelligence is it peaks remarkably early.
Okay.
It peaks most likely in your mid to late 20s. So that's not great, but there's light at the end of the tunnel in a second. I'll go through it. So that tends to peak. So the idea of the mind being a sponge dissipates quite early. Our learning potential does dissipate. Doesn't mean we can't learn, but there is a bit of that idea of you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Okay.
You can, just takes a bit longer.
Yeah.
That's it. So that peaks quite early in your 20s, stays fairly stable kind of into probably your late 30s, looking at the wider faculties involved. You won't really see significant drops in that, in cognitive ability, probably until late 60s, early 70s, just generally on average on a population level. But if you look at crystallized intelligence, that pretty much continues to increase all the way through life, up until extreme old age, pretty much. But that's because you're constantly learning, you're constantly involved, and you can feed that in your behavior and the environments you expose yourself to. So that can always improve. And the light at the end of the tunnel, as I said, or the silver lining, I should say, is when you look at occupational performance of individuals at different age ranges, a naive interpretation might be, well, the younger worker will outperform the older worker because they can pick up things quicker. But what you actually tend to see is workers that are in their 50s and 60s and moving into retirement, they can lean on an awful lot of experience, and they can offset any slight advantage of maybe not being quite as adaptable or quite as flexible or quite as quick. So you don't really see drops off in occupational performance quite as much. But the good news beyond that is there's ways to hold on to that ability in both camps. There's a lot of things you can do to stay sharp, because that's what a lot of people would worry about, especially if you do retire and you're not getting that constant stimulation, you're not working your brain quite as much. People worry about a drop off. And the literature broadly says that it's use it or lose it, essentially.
Okay.
So, but you don't need to be doing a PhD or engaging in theoretical physics in order to use it. Like little simple things like making sure that you stay cognitively active. That could be doing a crossword a day. That could be doing Sudoku or playing card games or board games. And that could be as well being socially active. That's really, really important for brain health and function. So making sure that you make time to engage in social activities. One thing that I'm very aware of, because I leverage this for use in my life, and a lot of parents who struggle with childcare costs can use this as well. One way that older individuals can hold on to that cognitive capacity is through childcare. So say that if you don't want to pay the costs, say that to your mother or father, and they look after your child, you're sorted. And everybody wins. You have that, and then also looking after your physical health. Your brain is part of your body. People forget that. So diet is important. Omega-3, B vitamins are really important. Looking after your blood pressure, looking after your weight, don't smoke, and then also physical exercise. Obviously, can offset natural cognitive aging, but also, it can offset the potential probability of developing, say, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, things like that. So there's a lot you can do, and doing it early is best.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I guess sticking with the brain, when it comes to decision making and, in a work setting, a work capacity, I always wondered, is decision making part of our DNA? Is there a psychological element to the way and the reason we make decisions? As in, some people are speedy, quick, sharp. Some people are much slower, much more considered. Both can have positive or negative outcomes, but just two different styles. I'm definitely probably a slower decision maker.
Yeah.
But I don't take forever, but I don't make rash decisions. I take time, and I know people who like that decisions made. What part of us, how are decisions formed?
Well, people do differ. There's an awful lot of different influences that will have an impact on whether you're in one camp or the other or in between. So, like, for example, a lot of people would be familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work on this Thinking Fast and Slow. You know, that's a very popular book. And he basically spoke about those two kind of camps, or at least those styles of decision making. Decision one, quick, immediate, instinctive, automatic. System two, more deliberate, take your time, more analytic. And there's a place for both of them. Generally speaking, what you see is if people are engaging in that system one, fast, immediate decision making, they're relying on what they would call maybe hunches or instincts. What they're really relying upon there is experience. That all of those learned experiences up to that point have pushed them towards one option, one decision, rather than the other. That can be really useful. And that type of decision making is very useful in, you know, time constrained situations, in emergency situations. Whereas decision two, as long as you don't get into paralysis by analysis and, you know, you take 20 years to decide what you're having for lunch, that generally speaking should be, if the decision-making structure and organization and process is set up correctly, that should be more effective in more circumstances. So there's an awful lot of ways in which people differ. Some people, for example, are risk adverse, and some people are kind of risk takers, risk hungry. And that's Kahneman did a lot of that work too. And you can see people are very different. Another thing that we see with decision making is the way that you frame decisions has a massive impact on which potential option somebody will select. So, like, for example, to give you a quick one, Kahneman in the 70s used a particular little thought experiment, and he did a lot of experimentation on this. And he said, imagine a situation in which 600 people got infected with a deadly virus. You need to figure out what option you're going to take next. So you get two options. I'm not putting you on the spot. You can tell me what you think.
Okay,
there's no right answer or wrong answer. You'll hear it in a second.
Yeah.
And so 600 people infected with a deadly virus. Which treatment option do we take? Do we take treatment option A, where 200 people will survive? Or do we take treatment option B, where we have a 33% chance of saving all of them? And then obviously a chance of not saving any of them. We learn an awful lot about people depending on which one they pick. Which one would you go
Probably
for?
B.
You go for B.
I think so.
That gives me an indication you would take the risk. You would rather go all out to get everybody rather than take the risk of, oh, we might lose everybody. Yeah. That's the rarer choice.
Oh.
And yeah, which is cool. Like, and I would tend to see in business, you'll see more people that are risk takers because sometimes it necessitates risk taking. About 3/4 of people take the other option.
Okay.
So we tend to see people are a bit more conservative. But interestingly, answers change when you frame that question differently. So if I was to say the same thing, 600 people infected with a deadly virus, if I was to say treatment option A, 400 people will die, or if I say treatment option B, then there's 67% chance that all of them die. Which should you pick then?
Yeah, I'm influenced, but I can see the logic of A because you feel like you're, saving more, but I feel like
you still go
I want to go B. So I want to take the risk.
You'll see a lot of people change. A lot of people who answered A the first time will risk it because the prospect of choosing a decision that comes to a certain loss, let's say, and people don't like that. They'd rather risk it when it's framed that way. It's the same question, framed two different ways. People become riskier or less risky depending on how you present it. So I think you can learn an awful lot about that when it comes to making decisions as part of a team. And one little quick thing, one little system that people can use straight away, a little structure that will help, I suppose, streamline that decision-making process. I came across looking at the NASA and its organization, its protocols. And they have an acronym they use for making decisions, particularly in stressful situations, time-constrained situations. And that's FORDEC.
Okay.
So F in FORDEC stands for facts. So what do you know? What information do you have? What information do you need? Spend some time figuring that out. What precisely is the problem we have here? What precisely is this decision that needs to be made? You have O is then options. So how many different ways can we attack this problem? What different options do we have in terms of our subsequent behavior? Make sure you think that through. They say you always want to have 4. If you can have 4 options, you probably have a good one in that mix. And then you have R, risk and benefit. Look at those 4 options and see, okay, pros and cons of each. And then my favorite part is there's a dash between FORDEC. And the dash just signifies take a second to reflect on the first 3 steps. Do you have all the information? Do you know all the options? Have you looked at all the risks? Have you done your due diligence? Then after that, decide, pick an option. E, execute and fully commit to it. And C, check. So the whole time you're executing, you're checking for new information, you're evaluating if it's bringing you closer to the goal state, and if you need to change course, and you do. So it's really interesting. You learn a lot from those guys. They always say, fail faster. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before.
I'm not from, it's familiar, but I'm not, learned on it.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So definitely a risk taker.
Yeah.
But I don't make really rash or quick decisions, but I enjoy taking a risk. Definitely. Yeah.
And see, people are different. I wouldn't. I would prefer the certainty rather than going all out. And that's just a difference between people. And I suppose you have to understand that if you want to get people working.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Wow. No, I like that. I saw that you posted recently about the win for Carlos Alcaraz over Novak Djokovic.
Yeah.
And you stated that emotion is a tool, learn how to harness it. And that actually caught my eye. I paid attention to that. I guess I would like to understand what you meant by that and how we can apply that in our day-to-day jobs and in business and, when we're trading.
Yeah, well, and as I said at the start, emotion can often be that spanner in the works. Everything else can be set up, and then if emotion isn't harnessed effectively, it can be really problematic. So what I would tend to say to people is people sometimes can be victims of their own emotion. And I'm not suggesting that you need to be cold and shut off from your emotion, because that's not useful either. But what I would say is you need to understand emotion, you need to understand its value. And I try to teach them a little bit about how emotion works. Because once you have that information, you can then transform an emotional state reasonably well. So the way I always present emotion is it's a guide for action. So if we look at the emotion we understand best in psychology, it's fear. And it might be the oldest, evolutionarily speaking, emotion that we have, that are discussed. But if we look at fear, fear is valuable, at least going back into our evolutionary history, because it keeps us out of trouble. It breeds a set of behaviors or catalyzes a set of behaviors that should keep us safe. We see something scary, we run away from it. It's scary because it's threatening. We're looking after ourselves. So what I would always say to people is, don't shut yourself out from your emotion. Feel the emotion, but dig into the emotion, try to understand the wisdom, the lesson that it's trying to give you. This is used in a lot of different therapeutic methods too. And the idea of the wise mind being both rational and emotional. Understand what it's telling you. If you're nervous before a presentation, why is that? Well, because you care, you want to do well. That's a good thing. And if you feel dejected after a setback, again, it's telling you the same thing, whatever it is. So what you need to do is take that lesson, but then you need to make sure that you do not let that emotion dictate your behavior afterwards. It's done its job then. When you identify what has made you feel that way, well, then you have the new information you need to make sure you don't feel that way again, if it's a negative emotion. So what I always talk to people about is emotion, the way it is structured, the way it works neurologically, physiologically, is we have more control over it than people realize. So what we can't control is our initial emotional reaction. So somebody insults you, you might feel anger rising up. Something happens, you might feel anxious. You don't get to control that first hit, but you do get to control your response to it. And a key component of emotion is how we think about that emotion and how we perceive our environment. That gives the emotion its color. Because even though you could list off 30 or 40 different emotions, physiologically speaking, those distinctions aren't held up. Excitement and fear look basically the same. What's different? Well, the environment. That if it's Christmas Eve, well, the reason that your heart is pumping and you feel a bit sweaty is because you're excited about Santa coming, whatever. If it's the night before you're leaving cert and you're feeling those same experiences, you interpret that environment as, oh, I'm afraid, I'm anxious. So if we ask ourselves certain questions about the environment, about the emotion, we can change those interpretations. It's a process called cognitive reappraisal. That can work really well. And then if we understand the value of different types of emotions, we can activate emotions strategically, is what I would say. So like I have particularly athletes. I have some athletes that they need to be cool, calm and collected. They need to just be cool as a cucumber in order to perform. They have to be emotionally cold almost. I have other athletes that work better when they're on fire, when they're angry, when they have a chip on their shoulder. And because what we see is those negative emotions produce energy. Negative emotions, I tend to liken to a car engine. It produces emotion. So nerves, tension, they're good things because it generates energy for you to do something. It gives you a resource to work with. Positive emotions then dictate where that energy is placed. So a harmful positive emotion would be pride. That usually doesn't work because you could have a lot of energy at your disposal that you could apply in some sort of context. But if you're feeling pride or satisfaction, you're looking backwards. You're looking at what I've already achieved. Whereas if you're feeling maybe a bit more assertive or aggressive or just confident, that's a little bit better, because that's pushing you towards attacking the goal, whatever it is. So it's based on this theory called individual zone of optimum functioning. I try to get all of my performers, be they business people, be they athletes, scientists, to identify that zone of optimum functioning. Do you need to get a hit in order to fight back? Or do you need to be cool and calm and collected? Let's identify that, and let's rustle it up when the emotion is generated.
Wow. Do you know, I can relate to that. So I'm the cool, calm and collected. I need to be alone.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to, you know, take stock, think, rationalize, you know, when I feel those nerves. Fear, probably similar with fear. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure anyone listening can apply themselves, you know. I guess a question before we wrap up is, as leaders, we all want to inspire action, and especially business owners. And, you know, it's something that is, I think, a passion for people that, you know, are driven by leadership. How do great leaders inspire action?
So, good question. And what I would say is there's an awful lot of work that's been done on leadership. It must be one of the most popular subjects, not just in psychology, but many other disciplines. And what I tend to find is when you look at it, a lot of this work muddies the waters and it complicates things. As I said earlier, when you look at leadership, the role is very clear. It's just window dressing that differs. The role of leadership, again, is to harness, optimize, catalyze individual effort and action towards a group goal. That's all it is. Doesn't matter what type of organization you're in. Doesn't matter if you're captain of a GAA team. Doesn't matter if you're CEO of a massive company. You're always trying to do that. So when we look at who does that effectively, or what skills do you need in order to have that impact? One model that people might be familiar with would be Daniel Goleman's leadership styles. And if you look at all these different types of leadership of doing that job, what you see is the one that comes out on top is the visionary leader. People might kind of know this as transformational leadership as well. And if we just look at it very precisely and say, well, what are these people doing that the other people are not doing? There's really two characteristics that they have. One is that they can articulate a very clear vision for what the team is trying to achieve, why it's important, why it's worthwhile, and they inspire individuals to work towards it. And then on the other hand, that's the other big job, is the social element, is they're sensitive and they're responsive to the subordinates' needs and desires and goals. And when you get those two things, that's transformational leadership, that's visionary leadership. And we tend to see that's the leadership that has the greatest impact on a working climate. In terms of Goleman's other styles, just real quick, you have a middle group that are moderately effective, like the coaching style, the affiliative style, the democratic style. They're very people focused. They're really invested in different ways in looking after the worker. Where they fall down is they don't articulate that vision clearly. They don't set the stage for that. And then the weakest styles would be the pace setter style and the commanding style, which the pace setter style is you do as I do, you follow my lead. And then the commanding style will be you do as I say or else. Okay. They don't work because they're not responsive to the subordinates. They don't consider or acknowledge the subordinates. They're not responsive to their needs. They miss out that social emotional element. So it really boils down to that. And you even see people talk about charisma is like the hidden secret X factor ingredient for leadership. What charisma is, it's difficult to pin down. Everybody knows it when they see it, but it's difficult to pin down. The best explanation of charisma I've come across really outlines those same things we see in visionary transformational leadership with a few additions. So we still have that idea, articulating the vision. We have that idea of being sensitive, responsive to the followers, the subordinates. But then you have these other two components would be a willingness to demonstrate novel behavior, do things differently. And then associated with that is a willingness to take risks. People flock to that type of leader because of what it kind of connotes, what impression it gives, and what impact it can have.
Wow. God, I'm thinking of like placing people that I know that I've felt like that. My business partner, Linda, I feel like she's that person, you know, as well. It's just, I think thinking about what you're saying, like it's really inspiring, you know, and it hits home. And I can definitely pick a small number of people in my life that fit that, like very small number of people.
And it's very powerful, that
is,
influence. And you would follow her through hell and
Oh.
back, probably.
We're together 11 years. We're like an
There you
unmarried
go.
couple, you know.
Yeah, there you go,
But you, for me, you've described, you know, her and one or two other people that I know, and it's so such a powerful
100%.
thing, and it's natural.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
not forced.
Yeah, and that's when you tend to see it's most effective. Now, anybody can do those things with the right little bit of help. Some
Yeah.
people it just comes naturally to,
Yeah.
and people, again, flock to them.
Yeah.
That's what I always say. You see charisma in some politicians, you see it in rock stars, and you see it in cult leaders. That's where you see charisma.
Leaders, yeah. I like it. Brilliant. Thank you. So just to wrap up the interview, we have a few fun questions. So the first one is, if you were stuck on a desert island, what 3 items would you bring and why?
Okay, can I just say, my partner said not to give this answer, right? But it feels true to me. It feels like I'm being
You got to be you.
Yeah. So my 3 things is a really long book and 2 dogs. That's
and 2
answer.
what, sorry?
Dogs.
Oh, dogs. Sorry.
Yeah. Do they count as objects?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
2 dogs. That's all I need.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. You can just snuggle up and read your book. You won't
100%.
care what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
I love it. And what was the last book or podcast that you read or listened to?
A podcast on the drive up here. I was listening to the Louis Theroux podcast with Nile Rodgers, which was great. The last book, I don't get to read as much now because I have a 1-year-old at home, so that's fun. The last book I read was Lonesome Traveller by Jack Kerouac. I love all the Beat Generation, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
You're a podcast person.
I'm very selective, but
Same.
yeah, I do like podcasts. Yeah, especially because I feel like it's a productive use of my time when I'm running or when I'm in the car or when I'm cooking dinner. So I like it.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I'm saying I would put an interview or something on YouTube that I can, if I'm doing a slow enough run on a treadmill, that I can like focus on, and next thing you know, 30 minutes have passed.
There you go.
If you were to host a dinner party, what 3 guests would you bring?
Okay, so again, like I have probably what is the right answer, and then I have to choose. Like the right answer, I'm supposed to say like Kobe Bryant, and like things like that, and I would love that. But who I'd really have is I'd want smart and funny people, and these are all people I'm obsessed with, and I'm also an old fogey for saying them. One would be Charlie Chaplin. I've been obsessed with Charlie Chaplin, for years and years. The other would be Orson Welles, because nobody tells a story like he does. Like he tells stories about like being at dinner parties with Hitler, like in 1928 and stuff like that. And then the last one would be Robin Williams. I think that's a nice, they all make sense to me as a team.
Yeah, great. I know. I think if I was having people, I'd have just a bunch of comedians.
Yeah.
So I could just be silent and observe, you know, have to say nothing.
I think I probably should give like a very like insightful answer, like high performance answer, but it's a dinner party. I'm not working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're drinking wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Alrighty.